Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us, whether you're watching live or on demand. Excited to be with you this afternoon for our first LinkedIn Live, hopefully first of many. Brief introduction, my name is Chris Wixon. I'm the CEO and co-founder here at ReelFlow, and I'm excited to be joined by my colleague Will Towning. Will, your job title is not a GTM engineer, but if you were joining us today, I think it would be probably the hottest job title in tech right now. So, Will, looking forward to diving into this over the next 30 minutes or so.
Yeah, me too. Welcome everyone. So sort of go-to-market engineer here at ReelFlow and building and responsible for building what we're going to sort of dig into today. So yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, Will is very much the sort of brains behind this whole operation that we're going to be running through. But worth saying, Will, you're not, technical. You're not a developer by background. You sort of self-taught yourself all these tools over the last few months.
Yeah, I mean, we'll sort of show you in a bit. There's a fair amount of tools and stuff involved in this system, but yeah, I'm not a coder, no technical background. This is something that I've just got stuck into a bunch of these tools and learned over the last sort of 6 months or so. So hopefully that gives you a bit more confidence. And whilst we may be, throwing out some terms and some tools, this is still very much from the perspective of, we can build this as not non-technical users, but just sort of getting stuck into things. So yeah, should be fun.
Yeah, so let's set the scene and dive into it. So very briefly to introduce ReelFlow, because I think it's important in terms of the context of what we're doing and how we're doing this. It's useful to understand why we're doing this. So briefly, we're a relatively new early stage startup, around a year old. ReelFlow is a new way to engage with your visitors, your website, your buyers through interactive short form video experiences. And briefly, I guess why we're building ReelFlow, we know we're all consuming more short form video than ever before, over on social channels, LinkedIn. We know the role and the sort of rise and influence of video. It continues to increase. Yet in contrast with that, most B2B websites, we've still been building them like we have done for the last decade, right? They're sort of text heavy, static experiences, complex. So our inspiration for the product was, can we bring that same kind of short form, authentic talking head video content easily to an existing B2B website and crucially make it interactive, give today's buyers are looking for sort of more self-guided experiences. They're going deeper into their research before they're willing to sort of book a demo and engage with us. So can we make it a much more engaging, interactive experience around a website as they navigate deeper, learn and see and hear from the real people behind the business? And then as we think about Outbound, and we'll get into sort of what we're going to talk about today, it's worth saying we've been doing Outbound on hard mode over the last 6 months or so, as we're an unknown brand, new to market. We've got a relatively new product. It's not an established category, and we don't have huge amounts of marketing air cover. So over the summer, and the reason we've called this sort of Outbound 3.0 is we've been sort of evolving how we're doing Outbound. And I think it's fair to say Outbound is tough for even the established brands right now. We know the volume of outbound activity is way up. AI, for all the amazing things it's done, has made it easier than ever to distribute messages. We know inboxes are flooded. We know LinkedIn inboxes are increasingly noisy. Everyone's kind of using similar kind of scripts and personalization. And we know buyers are filtering pretty aggressively. I think about my own inbox. I use AI tools in my inbox to organize my messages, and I've got a folder in there called marketing, and it's got 3,000 unread emails in there. So if anybody's emailed me over the last 6 months, it's going in that folder. I'm not even choosing to ignore the emails. I'm just not even seeing them. And yeah, we know we're not alone with that. So I'll kind of talk you through the kind of evolution of Outbound here, and then we'll get into the details of what we've been working on today. So over the summer, we started doing cold outbound email. We did your classic, go find the lists of accounts we think are a good fit, go do some research on them, craft the sort of sequence of messages. And I think we did a pretty good job. We were inspired by a lot of Jordan Crawford's thinking, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And the messages were pretty good, but minimal response, because I just think people, the emails weren't getting through. We warmed up inboxes, we were using multiple domains to send them out, but really hard to kind of get people just to read the email, let alone kind of respond to it. So given our product is a very visual product, it's a video product. It's one of those that when you see it on a website, most of our prospects and customers quite quickly get the product, what it's about, and start to think about the value it could bring. So we decided if we can get people to see the product in situ, that would make it a big difference. So this is how the kind of origins of this personalized landing page idea that we've started to put together. But again, like Outbound 2.0, I guess for us was still largely cold. We think you're a good fit for ReelFlow. Let us show you why and how. And again, a bit of a better response. We were using a bit more LinkedIn there, but still pretty tough. So Outbound 3.0, and I'll show you a quick example, and then we'll sort of work backwards of how this is coming together. So Outbound 3.0 for us the end result is our ability to automatically send out these very, very personalized landing pages aimed at a particular prospect who has shown some intent. There's some signals there that they're researching ReelFlow, they're potentially in market for what we do, or they're interested, they're somewhere in that journey. And this is a live example. So Drax, who are an energy security company, they're not an existing customer. This is an example of the output of this process we're going to run through today. So marketers at Drax have been receiving a link to this page, and everything on here is completely customized for them. The logo, we screenshot their home page, we inject a version of the ReelFlow player to that page, we add the ReelFlow product itself. So I've got a custom interactive video here. They can understand why we've built this page, understand more about ReelFlow, how it works, how teams use it. And then everything you see on this page, and I'll let Will go into more detail as we go through this, is really tailored to this particular account based on what we can know and see about the activity they've been doing, why we think they might be researching ReelFlow. So that hopefully sets the scene of what we're talking about Outbound 3.0. As I said in my LinkedIn post earlier in the week, this isn't a silver bullet. It's not the sort of secret to how we booked 100 meetings every day. It's a work in progress, but compared to the performance we were getting with our outbound email and messaging, seeing a dramatically better performance. And every time we show people this or they see this, it's definitely piqued people's interest. They've been interested in what we do, how we've been building this. So we thought we'd get together now and just kind of talk through the process. And Will's going to give you a sneak peek under the hood. Worth saying, if you've got any questions as we go through this, you can see the comments below. Please feel free to add them. And everybody who's watching and joining will receive not only their own version of a personalized page, but also full access to the playbook that Will has put together, which is comprehensive, goes into a lot of detail about everything we're going to be talking through over the next 20 minutes or so. I'll stop talking there. Will, let me hand over to you. Why don't you sort of set the scene and then we can get into it?
Yeah, sure. So I guess just for some sort of further context, what we try to do with these landing pages is sort of really go back to the roots of ReelFlow and sort of ultimately why we're building ReelFlow. And it's we believe there's a better way to enable our buyers to explore our products, our value proposition, and to learn about our businesses. And we sort of took that question further and be like, okay, so what does that mean from the outbound? Because the buying journey doesn't just start when they're on your site. Often it starts before where you're reaching out to them. And so we wanted to sort of think about that journey as sort of one full journey. Going back to what would outbound look like if it was focused on enabling our buyers rather than sort of chasing them through their inboxes. And this is sort of where we got to the landing page. So I have a few slides that I'll just sort of show you that might help sort of illustrate some of this. So the system that we've built sort of has these sort of core 5 steps, and we're going to sort of break down these a little bit further. But I wanted to sort of start at this level just to sort of give you a bit of an idea about kind of the steps involved and what's involved. So firstly, we listen for signals. We listen for this sort of meaningful buyer intent in real time. And goes without saying, this whole system is running in the background. So all of this is fully automated and is sort of running in the background as we can sort of focus on other stuff. But so the signals we are listening for, they range from different signals. But for this use case, we're talking about website intent, so visitors on our website. From there, we then look to really understand the context behind why they might be on our website. So why a prospect might be on our site exploring different pages and this kind of stuff. And we do a big sort of deep research project, as well as then sort of automating the enrichment of these company level data that sort of come through our system. And then with that deep research and understanding of why they might be on our site, and a bit of understanding of their situation, we then generate the landing pages automatically, and then also the video. So we have the kind of the landing page generation layer, and then the ReelFlow layer sort of then coming together at this sort of third point. And then from there, we try and get this into the right hands, to the right people. So part of our enrichment is to identify the whether it's marketing leaders or sales leaders that might be interested in this use case, and then try and get that out into their hands, and then the whole monitoring and tracking of the performance of both these, from a campaign perspective, but also from within, inside ReelFlow and our own sort of performance metrics on how people are engaging with the videos and the interactivity. So if we sort of take a zoom out, and you can now see the reason why I wanted to just sort of show you that simplified breakdown first. This is the system in its entirety, obviously a simplified sort of visualization of it, but these are all of the kind of tools that we're sort of plugging into this system, and then the flow that this is sort of going to take. And we're going to assume, in this call, that we're not going to necessarily break down what a clay table is and some of these sort of more fundamental elements of this. We are going to assume that you do understand some of these core elements, maybe what GitHub is and the role that Lovable might play. But I will go in and try and explain as much of it as possible, but still sort of keeping it at sort of one level above that. But being said, as we said at the start, we are non-technical. I'm not going to be talking in depth about different code languages and this kind of stuff.
I would say, Will, the playbook that everyone will receive goes into a lot more detail on each of these steps. And I think just to, I guess, give a bit more context and clarify. So this whole process here, in this scenario we're going to run through, starts with a account visiting realflow.com. Not just once, not just looking at the homepage and bouncing, multiple visits, viewing multiple key pages on our site. That is the trigger in our scenario to analyze that company, understand if they're a good fit for us. If they are, we then sort of move them through this automated workflow, and the output being that example page that you saw for Drax that has now been sent out to key contacts at Drax in that scenario. And we've, as Will said, all of this is now automated and happening as we speak. There's these pages being generated and distributed.
Cool. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. And so sort of that sort of first part of it, as Chris mentioned, is this sort of the signals layer. So this is where we're collecting that data. In our case, we're getting this from HubSpot, and we're trying to identify some level of intent, and for us, we've sort of defined that as repeated visits to our website, and visits to sort of particular pages if they're sort of digging deeper into our product pages, our pricing pages. And then there's sort of the next phase of this is then sort of looking at social engagement. Are they engaging on different posts from whether it's Chris or posts related to sort of video-led marketing? Then we can start to sort of layer up these additional signals. Maybe it's other public data on website performance or text stack sort of changes, and these signals we can start to sort of layer up and sort of continue to improve as we sort of keep going with this. And I think these matter for the reason that we're trying to identify this sort of early shift or this sort of early indication that they might be facing the problem that ReelFlow can solve. So that's kind of where we sort of come from a signals perspective. And these we then push. I'll take a step back. We then push these signals through our system into our clay tables, which is where a lot of the enrichment does. A lot of the enrichment happens. But sort of before this is a kind of one-off project, and it's quite an important part of what we do. And as sort of Chris mentioned at the start, a lot of it's been inspired by Jordan Crawford, but it's this deep research and data recipe sort of part of the flow. And this is a one-off project that we do, and it's all about trying to find that moment when the problem that we solve becomes an urgent problem for a buyer or for a prospect out there. So we're moving, away from these kind of broad ICP concepts and personas to identifying not just the chronic pain that ReelFlow addresses, but that sort of acute pain, that moment in time where that pain is most painful, is most acute. And with the power of AI tools, their ability to sort of think critically and understand deeply the problems that we're trying to solve, and this industry and the problems that people are facing on their websites. Combine that with AI's knowledge of all of the publicly available data sets out there, we can start to identify these scenarios and the data that sort of backs up these scenarios. So what sort of Jordan Crawford, the terms that sort of he's coined, these sort of high tension scenarios, kind of what we're looking for, and then the data recipe that sort of backs it up. And this data recipe is basically asking, what digital footprint would we see if this customer, this prospect was facing this exact high tension scenario that we've identified through our sort of deep research process. And these data recipes could be 10 to 20 to 30 different data points, and they build up to form this pretty good understanding of where a customer or a prospect is at in their journey. And it's sort of adding this next layer. So once we've identified the signal that there is some level of intent there, they're on our website, they know about us, they're thinking about ReelFlow. This sort of next level down is then sort of trying to understand why they might be there, and start to sort of build that context for what we can ultimately end up then using in the sort of the messaging. And so once we've got that context and we sort of built this pretty sophisticated clay table, which has 30, 50, 60 columns of different enrichments that run automatically, we then start to then think about how do we then turn that understanding into a message. And this is kind of how we think about it at ReelFlow. So we've got this data recipe, which is this sort of top layer, which is all of these different data points that make up that sort of high tension scenario that we're talking about. And we like to then sort of think about these as conditions. So we sort of group these and identify different thresholds that would result in a condition or a sort of a category, whether they sort of meet it or not. So in our example, for example, if the customer has video on their website, or if we can see that their website is underperforming, or if they're posting video on their socials and their videos are doing really well, or if they're investing in other sort of tech that might be designed to sort of help website performance. And each one of these conditions could be made up of multiple different data points from the data recipe, but they help us kind of distill this quite messy and complex data recipe into some really sort of core elements that then help us sort of write our sort of messaging from there. And I think one of the bits that the playbook sort of goes into a little detail in is sort of actually how we then start to implement this. And we rely quite heavily on clay formulas to build the sort of the personalization, to build the messages based on this. So once we've got down to the conditions, we then start thinking about building a clay formula that's going to then help us generate this message. And in my opinion, and I'm, as we sort of said, I'm new to these tools. So this might be a popular opinion or unpopular opinion. I don't know this, but the clay formulas are one of the most powerful features in clay, because they not only enable you to maintain complete control over the messaging, whilst also sort of being, hyper personalized on a one-to-one basis, which is something that we've experimented with, sort of a pure AI messaging approach where, we have this great context, and, the promise of AI is if you, the more context you can give it, the more accurately it can then, generate these personalized messages. And maybe people have sort of cracked out how to do that elsewhere, but, we experimented a lot with that, and we found that there was so much inconsistency in the messages. It was very hard to sort of control the tone and the voice, despite even, uploading our own tone and voice. There was AI drift. It's maybe started right, but they ended up not quite hitting the mark. And for your own outbound, when the message is so important, in the end we just felt that wasn't it wasn't effective enough for us. So not only do formulas enable you to control every single character, every word, every part of that message, but you can still achieve that sort of one-to-one basis, and I'll sort of explain that in a minute. But also, it saves tons of credits. We're not using AI to write these messages. We're just using, the free clay credits to generate these quite complex formulas that then sort of generate the message for us. So how does it, I guess, kind of work? So we use AI to write the logic, to write the sort of the formula that then writes the message. So we break down our data recipe in multiple ways into these sort of human readable snippets. We use different thresholds to identify whether the website is performing well or bad, or different sort of tone variations, and then ultimately into like these sort of conditions. And this is where the formulas almost act as this conditional rule that decides when and how to use each snippet. So for example, with this one, it's almost like thinking about this as a sort of complex code breaker problem. We have this code which is these 4 different elements, and each prospect could have a different mix of each one of these, and what we're trying to do is identify what mix they have, what different conditions they do meet, and then tailor the message for them. And so in this sort of simple example, there's up to sort of 16 totally different messages and pitches that we would ultimately deliver to these customers based on their own scenario, whether they have video on their website or not. We would say it would be a different pitch for someone that's got video on their website. Having that interactivity element, we can already know that they're they have some maturity in their sort of video production and their thinking and strategy around video. So maybe pitching around the interactivity of ReelFlow is kind of that next level of value that we can offer. But jumping straight into that, for someone that doesn't even have video on their website or isn't posting video on their social media, there's a different story and there's a different conversation that we would want to have with them. So we try and bring in those sort of different levels of understanding of their own situation, to sort of then start crafting this message. So there's a lot there, and in the playbook does sort of break this down, so you can sort of start to piece this together. But I think that the real sort of and the only limit here, as opposed to when you're dumping all this context into AI, the limit there is the AI's ability to sort of compute that all in one go for every single prospect. For here, the real limit is only the humans, my own ability to sort of think through these complex logic chains, and believe me, we're better at that than AI is at the moment so far. So that could change, but
and Will, worth saying, we're using this sort of data recipe to construct the messaging primarily for the content that sits on these video landing pages that we're putting together. But for people watching, this could be used to inform the messaging you're using in your email or LinkedIn outreach, or informing if you're doing cold calling, informing the kind of script that you might use there. So this applies regardless of where you end up actually using this messaging, but gives you a really powerful, unique set of ingredients in that recipe, depending on the scenario of the prospect.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, even to the, this can inform, we use a lot of this stuff in our own sort of inbound validation or verification to understand, if we get an inbound, we can understand, where that inbound, perhaps why they've reached out to us in the first place. We can get that sort of immediate picture of who they are, and sort of broken down into these sort of very clear sort of conditions that we sort of pre-established through that sort of deep research phase.
Okay, so Will, do you want to take us now through, we've done the research, we've identified those signals, we're now building the landing page?
Yes. So to build the landing page, we use a combination of GitHub and Lovable. So GitHub is where we do the hosting and the deployment of the actual landing pages. So the data is from the clay tables is pushed into GitHub itself. And then Lovable is used for building the landing page design and HTML sort of templates. And how it works is, so we have multiple HTML templates for sort of different use cases. We have 2 or 3 depending on the different kind of use case that we're generating the landing page for. Where within these templates, every asset, as we sort of talked about before, every logo, every image, every bit of content, every button, every box can be completely dynamic. Just as when we're sort of dynamically adding, company name and name to our, traditional outreach with the emails, the exact same, but within a landing page, but every single bit of content. So our clay table is a bunch of columns, and there are a load of columns in that clay table that correspond to one of these sort of dynamic placeholders that we've built within our template. And when we generate the landing page, GitHub basically pulls that template, pulls the data that we've generated in Clay, and then brings that together to generate a landing page for every company, and if we wanted on a lead level basis as well. So it goes from the signal to the Clay enrichment to then GitHub, and then we generate the landing page. So that's ultimately how a landing page is created. And at the same time that we're sort of pushing these sort of key bits of data, at the same time we're also sort of pushing these sort of key bits of data into ReelFlow, where we sort of add the sort of interactive video element. And yeah, Chris, maybe you can chat a bit more.
Yeah. So as Will was just talking there, everything you see here is customized based off the research we did through the clay table. So from the language we use, the messaging, the screenshotting their homepage, the reference points we refer to in the copy. This section here is completely unique based on that recipe. Every one of these pages has a unique section here based on what we can tell about, in this case, Drax's scenario. And then, as Will alluded to, we obviously practice what we preach. We add the ReelFlow player to this page. And we do this in a few different ways. In some scenarios, if it's a real high fit account for us, maybe a business I've spoken to, we know we're in a deal cycle with, I might actually record a unique video specifically for them. In most cases, there's a general set of interactive videos here that explain why we've put this page together, help them navigate the page and learn more about ReelFlow and the use cases. This can be done either in real or pre-recorded content, or using AI through the ReelFlow products. We have the ability to generate video, unique video using AI as well, which is pretty cool. And ultimately, the objective here is to obviously get somebody to a conversion point, get them to either book in some time with me to learn more, see a demo, do a discovery call, or they could sign up for a trial and go and get their hands on the product, or visit the main site to learn more about the product and the pricing. So we kind of, again, coming back to that, like embrace the buyer's journey, meet them where they are, give them options, let them sort of self-guide, closer to a point of conversion. So that's how, so we add the ReelFlow player, and then the final bit, I guess, of the mix, and I'll stop sharing so you can kind of bring back up the workflow. But given we're operating in Europe, GDPR, we can only identify people to an account level. So as Will said at the start, we use HubSpot's sort of intent data to fuel that. So we can see accounts that are on ReelFlow.com and meet that criteria. But clearly we can't see a contact level. So as part of the research we do, we go and identify the right personas for us. In our case, it's senior marketers, people responsible for the website, senior revenue leaders. So this also triggers a LinkedIn connection campaign where I go and connect with the right people, the right contacts on LinkedIn. And then once they accept that connection request, that's when we sort of start the sequence of messaging, ultimately sending them the link, trying to get them to visit the page. And we do that through the tools that you can see on screen here.
Yeah, absolutely. And and just in the same way that we personalize these landing pages and the messages, we're doing that within the actual, LinkedIn message itself when we're sort of sending it out. So we're talking about maybe the situation they're in, and we're sort of mentioning that this understanding that we believe sort of within that message adds that relevance, and hopefully encourages them to check out our landing page. And I think it's worth mentioning, because we've covered a lot here, that this is all happening in the background, sort of whirring away, whilst we are sort of focusing on other parts of the business, and then responding to sort of the engagement that we're sort of getting off the back of this. So yeah, it's been a long learning process, but it's been a really fun experience, and it's great to see that this is sort of generating some results now. So
yeah, thanks, Will. Well, hopefully we've given you a bit of a sort of peek under the hood of what we built together. As I mentioned, everyone's going to get access to the playbook, which goes into a lot more detail of every step along the way here. Here's a sort of sneak peek of the playbook we put together. So look out for that. You're also going to receive your own personalized version of the landing page. So you can actually see for this process come together in reality. And as I said at the start, this is not a sort of silver bullet. This is still a work in progress. But hopefully we've sort of inspired a few thoughts and thinking of how you might be able to apply this to your own outbound efforts. We're continuing to evolve this as we go, and just trying to do something different to break through the noise in what we know is an incredibly crowded market right now, as I touched on at the start of the conversation. So look forward to hearing people's thoughts. Keep an eye out for the playbook and your own version of the page. And thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.